The rain wouldn't stop that night. A small town in Georgia sat wrapped in thunder, but the silence inside the old farmhouse was louder than the storm. 6-year-old Ellie stood barefoot in the mud, her tiny hands clutching a soaked teddy bear, eyes staring blankly into the flashing police lights. She had wandered out alone and barefoot, whispering to the sheriff through cracked lips, "Daddy's under the well." No one took her seriously. They thought it was trauma, the mind of a child reacting to her father's sudden disappearance. Her mother, eyes red and silent, couldn't explain it either. The well behind their house had been sealed years ago, the stone rim overgrown and forgotten. The sheriff ordered a brief search, but no digging. "Just grief," they said. "She doesn't understand what she's saying." Years passed. Ellie never spoke of that night again, but she never forgot. 18 years later, now a grown woman with a haunted look in her eyes, she returned to that same patch of earth. The well still stood, buried beneath weeds and time. This time, she brought a camera crew, 2 excavation experts, and a resolve carved from heartbreak. She was done being dismissed. As the digging began, what lay beneath was darker than memory and more horrifying than any of them imagined. The excavation crew worked in tense silence, shovels scraping against damp earth, every inch echoing Ellie's heartbeat. Reporters had begun to gather beyond the rusted fence, drawn by whispers of a long-buried secret. But Ellie ignored the noise, her focus locked on the cracked stone mouth of the old well that had haunted her dreams since childhood. Something told her. This wasn't just about her father anymore. On the 3rd day, one of the workers' shovels struck something hollow. A sudden metallic clang cut through the air like a scream. Everyone froze. Ellie rushed forward, staring into the freshly exposed earth. A corroded lid, round, bolted shut, sealed by time and rust, lay buried beneath the soil, not part of any well. It wasn't on any map. The sheriff, now retired and visibly shaken, whispered, "That's not supposed to be there." Old Town records mysteriously went missing days before the dig. A former city engineer disappeared just last week after Ellie reached out to him. And now, the mayor called to pause the excavation for safety reasons. But Ellie refused. She had already sacrificed too much for silence. Then, in the middle of the night, someone slashed the crew's tires and left a note pinned to Ellie's door. "Stop digging or join him." She held the paper in her hands, heart pounding, and made one silent vow. "No matter what I find, I won't stop until the world knows the truth." She had only been 6 when her world fell apart. Ellie remembered holding her daddy's hand while walking the path near the old oak tree just days before he vanished. He used to carry her on his shoulders and call her his sky angel because she always looked up at the stars. On the night he disappeared, her mother had been crying in the kitchen, her father pacing outside, then silence. That was the last time she saw him. The police chalked it up to abandonment. Maybe he left, they said. Sometimes fathers just walk away. But Ellie knew. She remembered her daddy kissing her forehead that night and whispering, "I'll always be right here, baby girl." A man who said those words could never just disappear. She tried to explain to the adults, but her voice was too small. And when she said, "Daddy's under the well," they told her it was just a dream. She grew up with whispers behind her back. That's the girl who made up that creepy story. Bullied in school, alone at home, Ellie stopped talking about it. Her innocence had been mistaken for imagination, her grief misread as madness. Only her teddy bear knew how many nights she cried into her pillow, whispering apologies to the wind. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I couldn't make them believe me." But that fragile little girl never stopped hoping. Her heart stayed pure, her memory sharp. 18 years later, when she stepped onto the overgrown field where her childhood ended, she wasn't driven by revenge. She was driven by love. A daughter's love that never faded, never stopped whispering through the years. "I'll find you, Daddy, I promise." As the digging deepened, so did the silence of those who had once lived comfortably with the truth buried beneath their feet. Ellie's presence stirred more than just old soil. It stirred memory, painful, inconvenient, human memory. Suddenly, people began to remember things they had worked hard to forget. Mr. Grayson, the former town sheriff, sat alone in his quiet home, gripping a yellowing folder he'd kept locked away for nearly 2 decades. Inside were reports he never filed, a child's drawing marked "Daddy Under the Well," and a tape, an interview with Ellie's mother, who had begged him to look further. But the mayor had called it off. No use digging up ghosts, they said. He had nodded back then, too cowardly to push back. And now, the guilt was unbearable. For 18 years, he lived in comfort, while a child lived in torment. Across town, Martha, the elderly librarian, pulled out the town's original blueprints, dusty and rolled into the forgotten archive room. Her hands trembled as she traced. The lines, seeing for the first time what had been hidden in plain sight. The well's location had been removed from public records right after Ellie's father vanished. She remembered how the town council dismissed the story. "The girl's unstable," they said. But Martha had always wondered, and done nothing. The moral lines blurred as the townsfolk, one by one, felt the weight of their silence. They had chosen comfort over truth, reputation over justice. But now, as Ellie stood brave before the world, determined to uncover whatever lay beneath, their consciences were exposed. They began stepping forward, not for her forgiveness, but because they couldn't carry the shame anymore. It wasn't just about one man buried under the well. It was about the cost of silence, the danger of dismissing a child's truth, the hidden damage of collective denial. And slowly, as the town watched Ellie fight alone, something shifted. Consciences began to wake up, because when innocence screams and no one listens, the soul of a place rots. And now, it was time to clean the rot. The sun was beginning to set behind the hills when the digging team struck something solid. A metallic clang echoed through the field, followed by a stunned silence. Ellie's heart stopped. Her fingers trembled as she stepped forward. The workers pulled away layers of earth, revealing an old, rusted trapdoor beneath what used to be the well's stone perimeter. Overgrown weeds had hidden it all these years. It was real. The well existed. Ellie fell to her knees, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I wasn't crazy," she whispered. "I was just a little girl who knew the truth." One of the workers reached for her hand, but she shook her head gently. This was hers to face. As the door creaked open, a heavy gust of air escaped. Cold and damp like time had frozen below. The flashlight beams cut through the blackness until they stopped. A figure. Skeletal remains wrapped in what was once a denim jacket. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer and saw it. A rusted keychain still clipped to the belt. A tiny red rocket, her favorite toy, the one her dad carried everywhere. She collapsed in sobs. No screaming. Just a broken, quiet grief. "Daddy, you didn't leave me." It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a child's dream. Her truth had always been real. The cameras kept rolling, the news crew filming every raw moment. But Ellie didn't care. She held the remains, like a daughter hugging her father's ghost. And then, she reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded drawing, a crayon sketch from 18 years ago, A girl, a man, and a well. She placed it gently beside the bones and whispered, "I kept my promise, Daddy. I found you." The town stood behind her in stunned, reverent silence. A crowd of adults who once turned their backs on her now wept openly. Even Sheriff Grayson, in full uniform, fell to his knees and removed his hat. In that moment, the world didn't see a grieving woman. They saw a daughter who never stopped believing, and a community that had to finally reckon with the truth. The hum of machinery quieted. Shovels dropped. A strange stillness overtook the dig site. Ellie stood at the edge of the pit, her boots coated in mud, the afternoon sun now melting into a deep orange twilight behind her. The lead excavation worker turned to her, his voice low and stunned. "We hit something." She couldn't breathe. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she took slow, staggering steps forward. The crew cleared away the final layer of earth, revealing an aged, rusted metal plate beneath a network of rotted wood. It wasn't in the blueprints. It shouldn't have been there. But she knew. Deep in her bones, she knew. "It's real," she whispered. "I told everyone. I told them." The others stood back. Ellie crouched low, her hands trembling as they hovered over the trapdoor's handle. She hesitated. It felt sacred, like touching a memory that could shatter her. She pulled. The hinges creaked violently, stiff with rust, shrieking as the door gave way and a musty gust of air surged up from below. It was cold. So cold. Like the well had been frozen in time, untouched, by light or warmth. The air carried something else too, a heaviness, a smell of secrets long buried. She reached for the flashlight someone handed her. The beam scanned the darkness, hitting damp stone walls, old wooden beams, and then a shape. Her breath hitched. Skeleton, curled on its side, the remains of a man preserved under the earth for nearly 2 decades. He was dressed in faded clothes, fragments of denim and a jacket sleeve still intact. But what broke her, what truly shattered her, was the keychain. A red rocket toy, burnt, weathered, but unmistakable. Her red rocket. The same one she gave him on her 5th birthday, the one he never left home without. She dropped the flashlight, fell to her knees, and let out a soft, broken sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a sob, just a tremble of soul-crushing truth. It's him. The air around her became blurry. The noise of the crowd faded. Ellie's mind pulled her backward, visions of her father lifting her on his shoulders, twirling her in the backyard, whispering bedtime stories about the stars. "I wasn't crazy. You really were under the well." She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a folded paper. A child's drawing. Her drawing. It was old and faded now. The crayon lines smudged, but still legible. A little girl, a tall man, and a well behind them. She placed it gently next to the bones, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "I told you I'd find you, even if it took forever." Her tears fell like rain. Sheriff Grayson, who had once dismissed her as a mentally disturbed child, stood at a distance with his hat pressed to his chest, shame and disbelief etched deep into his face. He watched the girl he once ignored now uncover a truth that made the entire town crumble in guilt. Reporters stopped talking. Cameras stopped flashing. Even the wind seemed to pause. The moment transcended time. A daughter mourning the father no one believed existed. A community forced to reckon with the innocence it had silenced. And a child's promise that had never wavered, not even when the whole world turned its back. Ellie curled into herself beside the grave, wrapping her arms around what was left of her childhood. I'm sorry it took so long. But you were never alone. The news would later call it the Well of Ghosts. But to Ellie, it was simply her father's resting place, and the place where her voice was finally heard. Just as the town began to mourn and process what was uncovered beneath the well, a new voice entered the conversation. A quiet one, a forgotten one. Mrs. Callahan, the reclusive old woman who lived 3 houses down from where Ellie grew up, appeared at the edge of the crowd. Her back hunched, her hands trembling, but her eyes carried decades of secrets. I knew, she said softly. The crowd hushed. I knew he was under there. Silence dropped like a curtain. Ellie's heart froze. What did you just say? The old woman stepped closer, her cane digging into the soft earth. I tried to tell people. 18 years ago, the night he vanished, I saw something from my kitchen window, something no one would believe. The sheriff stepped forward, cautious. You never came to me. Mrs. Callahan chuckled bitterly. I did. But no one listens to a woman who talks to her cat and forgets to take her pills. Ellie's voice cracked. What did you see? The old woman looked her dead in the eyes. Your father didn't fall into that well by accident. He was pushed. Gasps rippled across the crowd. The world tilted beneath Ellie's feet. Pushed? By who? Mrs. Callahan's lips trembled. Her eyes darted toward the back of the crowd. By someone he trusted. Someone standing right here. Murmurs surged. Faces turned. Whispers filled the air. Then a man stepped out of the shadows, Mayor Richard Holloway, the very man who once comforted Ellie's mother after the disappearance, who led the town's annual charity in her father's name, who made speeches about never giving up on the lost. His face was stone, unreadable. You've got nothing, he said coldly, but Mrs. Callahan pulled out something from her purse, a cassette tape. Worn, cracked, but marked with a single word, confession. I recorded your meeting the night before. He disappeared, she said. I was babysitting Ellie that night. He thought I was asleep in the guest room, but I heard it all. The argument, the threats, the reason he was going to the authorities. Ellie stared at the tape like it was a burning coal. What reason? She whispered. Mrs. Callahan turned to her. He found out about the land deal. The one that would have made Holloway a millionaire if your dad didn't report it. He never made it to the station. The sheriff took the tape with shaking hands. If this is real, it's real, Mrs. Callahan said. He came to me the next day. He was scared. Said he was going to dig deeper. Said if anything happened to him, the truth was under the well. The crowd was stunned. People who had worshipped Holloway now looked at him with horror. And just as the sheriff was about to speak, Ellie turned toward her old home, tears running down her face, not because of the betrayal, but because the thing her father feared most was real. And he tried to leave her a trail. Not just words, not just memories. She walked slowly toward her childhood backyard, stopping beside the crooked tree her father had once carved her name into. And there, half buried beneath the roots, was a rusted metal box she'd always thought was just a rock. Inside, maps, letters, documents with the mayor's signature. Evidence he never got to deliver. She held them high. The crowd roared. Gasps turned to shouts. The lie that ruled the town for 18 years crumbled in seconds. And Ellie? She didn't scream, didn't run. She just whispered, You thought burying him would bury the truth, but he made sure his voice was louder underground than it ever was above. The cassette had changed everything, but it wasn't just the tape that brought the truth to light. It was the fact that someone had chosen to carry it alone through 18 long years. As the dust of revelation settled and reporters swarmed, the town like bees to honey, Mrs. Callahan refused every interview. She sat silently on her porch, feeding her cat, sipping the same tea she always had. Her name became known nationwide, but she didn't want the attention. Ellie went to visit her the next morning. The porch creaked beneath her feet. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Ellie asked, eyes brimming with confusion. The old woman didn't look at her, just stared out at the empty road. "Because your mother asked me not to." Ellie's breath hitched. "She came to me 2 nights after." He vanished. She knew something was wrong. "She begged me not to tell you. Said you were just a child. Said if anything happened to her too, you'd be all alone, and she wanted you to have a chance at a normal life." Ellie sank into the porch chair beside her. Mrs. Callahan placed a trembling hand on her arm. "Your mother knew Holloway would watch her. She knew speaking out could be dangerous, so I made a promise. I kept the tape. I waited." Ellie looked away, tears falling quietly. "You could have been killed. I had nothing to lose," she whispered. "You had everything ahead of you." It hit Ellie like a wave. While she grew up wondering, aching, trying to piece together what had happened, someone had been silently holding the weight for her. No reward, no recognition. Just quiet, patient sacrifice. And then came the final blow. Mrs. Callahan handed her a letter. It was old, yellowed, addressed to Ellie, but never sent. "I was meant to give this to you when the time was right." Ellie opened it with shaking hands. Inside was her mother's handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means the truth has found its way. Forgive me for protecting you by staying silent. I wanted you to grow without fear, even if it meant you grew without answers." Her voice cracked as she read it aloud, her heart tearing with each word. "I've watched you from a distance, proud of every little thing. I've kept your secrets, your birthday cards, every smile. My silence wasn't weakness. It was love, in its hardest form. But now, let your voice be louder than mine ever was, Mom." The camera would linger on Ellie's trembling hands, holding the letter, on Mrs. Callahan's weathered eyes, on the small box with her father's handwriting still stained from the earth. Ellie stood beneath the rusted wind chime in her backyard. The letter clutched in shaking hands. The well lay hidden, just a few feet from where her father once played with her. Her heartbeat grew louder than the breeze. This time she wouldn't stay quiet. "I'm done waiting," she whispered, teeth clenched. "They buried him in secrets. I'll bury them in truth." Her grief had boiled into resolve, and her eyes no longer carried fear. She walked into City Hall with a folder that could burn reputations. Faces turned pale as she placed it on the mayor's desk. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you, it's time to dig." Blueprints, falsified documents, dates that didn't match. She had proof the well was covered days after her father disappeared. Ellie didn't sleep. She connected every name, every shady deal. The name Holloway appeared again and again. His company owned the land, the construction, even the coroner's report. Ellie's hands shook, but not from fear. He knew. He watched us suffer. She stood in front of Holloway's mansion, press and cameras circling her like storm clouds. Her voice cracked through the megaphone. "This is what happens when greed buries love." The crowd fell silent. Her father's old cassette tape played next to her, the audio grainy but real. "If you're hearing this, something went wrong. They want to shut me up." Tears streamed down Ellie's face. She looked up at the mansion. "You didn't bury my father. You buried yourself." People gasped, reporters scribbled. Ellie had turned her pain into a blade, and she wasn't done swinging. Flyers spread across the town, each bearing Daniel Grayson's face. Children who once played in her yard now joined her protests. Ellie became a symbol, not of loss, but of fierce remembrance. She wasn't alone anymore. Her mother stood behind her, older but strong. Together, they lit candles at the edge of the well every night, waiting for the day the truth rose up. Ellie made one final vow to the crowd. Her voice steady. For every father taken, every lie told, we will fight. Because justice doesn't sleep, it rises. Holloway watched the news from his study, the fire crackling behind him. Ellie's face was everywhere, strong, unwavering. His hands trembled, not from age, but shame. He remembered Daniel Grayson, the only man brave enough to challenge him. And he remembered the look in Daniel's eyes the night he vanished. This won't stay buried, Daniel had warned. For 18 years, Holloway built walls of money around his guilt. But now those walls were cracking, and the truth bled through like water through stone. He stared at the envelope Ellie had sent, a photo of the well circled in red, and a note. Still think I don't know? Holloway's breath hitched. His past had found him. The nightmares returned that night. Daniel's voice echoed in his sleep. You took everything from me, but not her, not Ellie. Holloway woke, drenched in sweat. He poured whiskey but didn't drink it. Instead, he walked to his hidden drawer and pulled out the old flash drive, the one marked Grayson Evidence. He had kept it all these years. His palms were sweaty as he placed it on the table. For a moment, he stared at it like it might burn him. Then he whispered, It's time. The next morning, Holloway called the press. Not his lawyers, not his PR team, just the press. The world needed to hear the confession, not a polished lie. In front of flashing cameras, he stood aged, stripped of power. I covered up a man's disappearance. I buried truth beneath profit. And I have lived in regret every single day since. He released the flash drive to the reporters, emails, construction logs, audio tapes, and a single scanned letter from Daniel to his daughter. Keep asking questions, baby. Truth always rises. Ellie watched the broadcast from her kitchen, tears spilling silently. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just whispered, You finally did one thing right. Holloway didn't ask for forgiveness. He never could. But he stepped down from his empire and donated every asset to families whose loved ones had disappeared. It was his silent redemption. At Daniel's memorial, newly built near the well, Holloway stood at the back, unnoticed. He left a single white rose and a note. I failed your father, but I will never fail another. The crowd never saw him cry, but Ellie did. And for a brief second, she didn't see the monster. She saw a man drowning in the weight of his own decisions. She didn't speak to him. She didn't have to. Her eyes said what words could not. This isn't over, but maybe it's finally beginning. The day arrived, the day they would dig. The well, so long forgotten, now stood at the center of the world. Ellie's heart pounded as she stood at the edge, watching the machines roar to life. Do you think he's really down there? Her mother asked, voice shaking. Ellie didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was buried under years of lies. And now, so was her father. The ground trembled as the drill bit into the earth. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final revelation. For a moment, Ellie swore she could hear Daniel's voice, faint but real, whispering, You'll find me. The crowd gathered in silence. They all knew what was at stake, not just for Ellie, but for the whole town. Secrets that had festered for decades were about to be unearthed. Ellie watched as the machinery hit a hard surface. Her breath hitched. Is this it? She didn't dare blink. If her father was down there, if the truth was down there, this moment would change everything. A loud crack echoed, and the drill stopped. The workers exchanged looks. One of them nodded. "We've hit something," he called out. "We need more time." Ellie's pulse quickened. Time wasn't on her side anymore. The sun was setting, and the town was starting to get restless. The tension in the air was suffocating. "Start digging by hand," Ellie ordered, her voice firm. The workers hesitated, but the determination in her eyes was unshakable. "We're not stopping until we find him." As they cleared away dirt, a cold chill crept through Ellie's spine. The darkness of the well seemed to reach out to her. And just as the last bit of dirt was removed, a hand, a skeletal hand, emerged from the earth. The crowd gasped. The reporters swarmed. Ellie fell to her knees, her heart racing, as she finally saw the truth laid bare. It was him, her father, Daniel Grayson. He was there. A wave of disbelief crashed over Ellie, but with it came a powerful surge of relief. After all these years of searching, of fighting, of grieving, this was the moment she had been waiting for. But as they carefully removed the rest of the body, they found something unexpected. A small, weathered notebook clutched tightly in his hand. Ellie took it, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside were detailed notes, plans, thoughts, names of those who betrayed him, but one sentence stood out. "For Ellie, the truth must come to light." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Ellie looked up, her eyes fierce. The suspense had led to this moment of truth, and she knew exactly what to do. "We're not done yet. This is only the beginning," she vowed, clutching the notebook to her chest. The crowd fell silent, watching her, waiting for her next move. Ellie had done the impossible. She had uncovered the truth. And now, she would make sure no one could bury it again. In that moment, Ellie wasn't just a daughter. She was the beacon of justice, the symbol of hope for every life lost in the darkness. The truth would rise, and she would be the one to carry it. As the last of the dirt was carefully removed from the well, the sun dipped below the horizon. The crowd stood in stunned silence, watching Ellie hold the notebook close, the weight of her father's life and death finally beginning to settle in her heart. Ellie stood alone, but she wasn't broken. She had found her father, and now she had found something more, her purpose. As she held the weathered pages, her eyes flickered up to the crowd, now waiting for her to speak, to do something with the truth she had uncovered. Her voice, though soft, carried through the quiet night. "This isn't just about my father," she said, her words steady. "This is about every family, every person who's been silenced, buried under lies. We're going to make sure this never happens again." The moment felt timeless, like the world was on pause, giving her the strength to stand tall, to speak for those who had no voice. Ellie took a breath and stepped forward, her eyes bright with new determination. The past had shaped her, but it wouldn't define her. She was ready to rewrite the future. A single tear traced down her cheek, but it wasn't out of sorrow. It was the kind of tear that comes from relief, the kind of tear that marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Ellie reached out and handed the notebook to the police officers, her heart pounding. She had done the hard part. She had found the truth. Now it was time for the world to see it, and for the guilty to be held accountable. There would be no more hiding, no more secrets. As she walked away from the well, She turned one last time. The faint glow of the lights caught her face, and for the first time in years, Ellie smiled. Not out of joy, but out of something deeper, something stronger. She had set the truth free. The media swarmed, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, but Ellie didn't flinch. She wasn't that scared little girl anymore. She wasn't the daughter trapped in a nightmare. She was a woman who had found herself, and in finding the truth, she had found her peace. Behind her, the well stood as a symbol, not just of what was lost, but of what had been gained. Clarity, justice, hope. As Ellie walked into the night, the city around her was still, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. The fight wasn't over, but it had just begun, and she would be ready.